Want to stay up to date with everything that's happening on the show? Or do you have a story that you'd like to submit for one of our Listener Stories episodes? You can get in touch with the show via the website at www.hauntedukpodcast.com, on Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, on X at hauntedukpod, or you can email us at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and TikTok. And if you want to support the show, you can do it via either Patreon or Ko-fi. Both platforms have exactly the same content, but work in slightly different ways. One of the advantages of Patreon is its sleek user interface, but if you want to avoid those pesky additional charges Apple, Google, and Patreon apply to your subscription, then why not give Ko-fi a try? Simply open a browser window and type ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast. That's Ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast, and you'll soon find us. Whichever platform you choose, we're sure you'll enjoy the bonus content. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the episode. He looked like he was in agony, his face scrunched up and moving like he was trying to crawl backwards away from whatever he could see. Instinct took over and I accelerated away. Even as we moved further away, Mike still looked in pain. He kept saying, "Stop, stop." I thought he was talking to me, but I had zero intention of stopping. Yet now, I'm not so sure it was me he was talking to. This is episode 60, part 5 of the Haunted UK podcast, and we're about to bring season 6 to a close with the final collection of your listener stories. It's amazing to think that when I first started the Haunted UK podcast, it was only going to run for one season only. Just 10 episodes. But something happened at the end of that first season. People began getting in touch, asking when the second season was due to come out. I must admit that I was so incredibly humbled. It's one thing to create something like this, but it's entirely different to even contemplate that people are actually listening to it and enjoying it. The show began to pick up more listeners. I began to get more and more emails, more stories from you wonderful listeners. Then at the end of 2022, something amazing happened. Marie got in touch, and it was the beginning of what has become an incredibly precious and treasured friendship. Her skills in writing, proofreading, script editing, voiceovers, and now as an interviewer are just simply brilliant. She's been instrumental in the growth and progress of this show, and I can't stress to everyone who listens just how hard she works, how much effort she puts into every single episode we create, and how much of a pleasure it is to not only work with her, but to also be her friend. In her corner, full of encouragement and praise, is her husband Tom, an incredibly nice guy who not only cooks a mean Sunday dinner, but also conjures up some breathtaking artwork, as well as lending his voice talents to the show. As with everything in life, you can't please everyone and you can't win them all, but we do try our very best, and the fact that we're now closing out on our 6th season is testament to just how far we've come. But it's not quite over yet. We still have this last Listener Stories episode to go, and a very, very special guest to read the last ever story. For this episode anyway. So what are we waiting for? Let's dim the lights, settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Our first story comes to us from Shandy in York, for whom paranormal experiences seem to be somewhat of a family affair. Hiya, I love your podcast very much, and I tend to listen to your episodes on my way to work on the days I'm in the office. I live in York and consider myself a spiritual person. I'm also very drawn to runes and tarot. My mum is a medium and does card readings, so it's something I've grown up with. I've had a few experiences such as hands touching my feet in bed, and I often get poked in my shoulder when I'm facing my partner in bed. No one is ever there when I turn around, and nothing ever comes of it. But it startles me at the time because I'm sleeping when it happens, and it wakes me up. I also once heard a loud humming that no one else could hear while in a room with my siblings when I was younger. But beyond these more anecdotal stories, there is an experience I would like to share with you. It was in the mid-1990s. I was around 14 to 15 years old and would deliver Avon books around the neighborhood for work. One evening, my mum decided to join me to go knock on doors to collect my books. It was getting dark. At the top of the lane, we both had an urge to turn around and saw an unforgettable sight. A lady standing under a streetlight on the street corner, wearing a white hat, a long white coat, and holding a briefcase. For some reason, seeing this lady made me and my mum feel uneasy.
Oh my God. Come on, let's go.
We turned and ran a few steps, then stopped and turned back towards the lady. But she was gone. And so was the street lamp. We couldn't understand where she'd gone, but it was obvious something unusual had occurred because of the street lamp. I also have a younger brother who used to frequently see a man standing at the bottom of his bed when he was 2 years old. We used to find my brother hiding under his covers every night. He used to run out of the dining room, saying a man was in there and would describe him and what he was wearing. Again, a 2-year-old's imagination. But for his age, he was very descriptive, very precise. This went on for about a year. My mum called some medium friends to help this man cross over. Apparently, the man told my mum's friends that he didn't realize he'd died and had wandered into our house and took a shine to my little brother. And he said he was simply trying to spend time with him. He told them he was called Harry. After this night, my younger brother didn't complain about the man again. He later talked about other kids playing hide and seek in his closet as he got older. But that's a whole other story. Love your podcast. Thanks, Shandy. After speaking with Shandy, she revealed more stories experienced by herself and her family. Hi Steve, my oldest son was around 2 in 2010, and we were living on our own after starting fresh. One afternoon we were upstairs in the bathroom. I was cleaning and not paying too much attention to my son, as we had a stair gate at the top, so I didn't really need to worry about him falling. As I finished cleaning the bathroom mirror, my son ran out of the bathroom and into his bedroom. I followed him into his bedroom, but as I turned the corner, he wasn't there. I entered his empty bedroom and called for him, only to find him in my room. I was certain that I'd followed him into his room, unless it was someone else that I followed out of the bathroom. My son was only 2 years old, so I couldn't ask him much in regard as to what happened. Another experience was a bit darker and still scares me when I think about it. I was house-sitting for my grandparents one year. They'd gone on holiday and needed somebody to be around to feed the cats, so I volunteered, as this was before I had kids and had no responsibilities as such. I was laying on the sofa one night binge-watching a Superman marathon on TV. At around 2 or 3 a.m, I finally turned the TV off and stretched out on the sofa to go to sleep. I turned on the light and made sure the door was slightly ajar so the cats could move around. Suddenly, I heard a chill-inducing growl. It was loud and sounded like it was coming from the downstairs hallway. At this point, I was laying on the sofa in the dark, alone in the house, with only cats. Cats didn't make growling sounds like that. I froze and pulled the blanket up over my head. The growling must have lasted at least 7 to 8 minutes, though it felt more like an hour. When it finally stopped, I remained terrified that whatever it was, it would come back, so I didn't move an inch until morning. I still remember the feeling of terror, and I have no idea what caused the growling, but my grandparents came back the following day, so fortunately, I didn't need to stay another night. I told them what happened, but thankfully they never experienced anything like it, so whatever it was, it apparently only wandered into the house while I was there. I have no other explanation. After speaking to her mum, Rose, Shandy was able to share another story with us about her family. It's a tragic story where, thankfully, Shandy's mother trusted her intuition about a situation. Please be mindful of the content of this next story. It does mention abuse. Hi there, Steve. I would like to discuss an experience I had when I was in high school. My parents used to look after foster children, and one of the children at the time was a baby who was around 3 months old. Her parents hadn't been able to care for her as they should, and therefore she was placed with my parents for a few weeks until she could be placed elsewhere. My mum used to take photographs of the children she looked after. One photograph of this baby showed 2 nuns, one at each side of her whilst she was in a pram. The baby was always smiling, and due to the photograph, my mum believed the nuns were there to protect the baby. The baby eventually left to go back with her parents, and the day after she left, I went to school. As I entered the playground, I was alone as all of the children had already gone into the classrooms. Suddenly, I heard my name being called. I looked around but didn't see anyone. When in the classroom before the teacher turned up, the children were all talking, but to me it was like I was deaf as I couldn't hear a thing. Again, I heard my name being called. Then all of a sudden the room was filled with the voices of my classmates, as once again I could hear perfectly. After school, I told my mum what had happened that day. She immediately got in touch with social services, as she felt that the nuns were trying to tell us something. Social services checked on the baby and found that she had been abused. Therefore, she was once again taken away from her parents. That night, I went to bed and talked out loud to tell the nuns that the baby would be okay. I heard a voice that said, "Thank you." I can only imagine how disturbing this must have been for your mum and for all of you, and we hope there was a good outcome for the affected child. How terribly tragic, and thank goodness your mum listened to that gut feeling. Thank you so much for your stories, Shandy. They are fascinating and completely extraordinary. Our next listener shares her own experiences, as well as fascinating stories from her sister who works in a hospice setting. Hi Steve, I've been listening for a few months now and love the podcast. I'm yet to get through all the episodes, as sometimes I get too jumpy and need to take a break. I have a few stories you might be interested in, but as some relate to my sister who works in healthcare, I'd prefer to stay anonymous. First, 2 stories from my own experiences. Between the ages of 2 and 12, I lived in a new build house. It was number 15, but was between the numbers 11 and 17. We assume they skipped the number 13 for superstition. I don't know much about the history of the grounds, but despite it being a new build, it had a very weird feeling, and we didn't feel comfortable being upstairs alone. I used to have lots of trouble sleeping, with terrible nightmares. It got so bad that my mum arranged for a sleep specialist to visit, but I seemed to grow out of it. I've always been sensitive, and have exceptionally vivid or lucid dreams. One night, I woke up feeling that there was someone in the room with me, and I turned to see an old lady reaching out to touch my hair. I can only describe her as witchy, with a long black dress. I screamed so loudly and was shaking so violently that my mum moved me out of that bedroom into a different part of the house. I've since learnt about night terrors and how children and some adults can experience frightening visions when in a state of paralysis. Perhaps it was that. Once we'd moved and I was a bit older, my parents did admit that parts of the house had cold spots and that they would often hear footsteps and knocks upstairs when that part of the house was empty. My second story happened much more recently in an old cinema in West Wales. I went to see a Marvel film on my own and was delighted to find that on a Tuesday night I was the only person in the whole theatre. The building was originally a corn exchange and opened as a cinema in 1913. It has old-style flip-down seating where you pull down the bench to sit on it. As I cracked open a pack of Maltesers and waited for the adverts to start, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. I would describe it as a sensation that let me know I wasn't alone, and all the hairs on my arms stood on end. I simply knew it wasn't just me in the room anymore. Suddenly, the seat in front of me went down, as if someone had pulled it down to sit on it. These were ancient chairs, and you really needed to put your body weight on them to keep them down. A skeptic would say it was a mechanical fault, and that I was alone and primed to expect spooks in an old building. I whispered, "Please leave me alone," and tried to be brave, but then I heard the sound of people on the balcony, so I hot-footed it upstairs and abandoned my Maltesers altogether. Now for some stories from my sister. Hopefully she won't mind me sharing her experiences from her long career working in a hospice. The building is in a semi-rural setting within beautiful grounds. Before becoming more senior, she worked on the floor caring for patients and their families as they were made comfortable to part from this life. With an area with lots of death, the nurses had superstitions and beliefs from their own experiences of unexplained things going on. The first is that if deer were seen in the garden, they knew someone would die. This was because of the cause and effect style relationship that the nurses noticed with each sighting. Secondly, buzzers going off in en-suites connected to patient bedrooms, at times when the patients themselves were totally immobile and could not have possibly pulled them. It happened so often and always signaled that the moment of passing was close. In fact, it happened so frequently that it became a cue to inform the family that the time was nearing and to prepare themselves. Patients would often talk to people only they could see, and sometimes nurses themselves would smell old-style cologne. My sister once smelled cigar smoke. She didn't describe these instances as frightening, but instead she said it could be frustrating at times, especially when they were working a busy ward and buzzers were frequently going off. She believes that in places with lots of people moving out of life, the veil between life here and what is next is thinner, and energies coming and going interact with electricity and with our senses. My last story today involves both my sister and me. She was taking the family on holiday and I was dog-sitting. Whilst packing up to leave, she told me a story from the night before. Her eldest daughter, who was 12 at the time, mentioned over breakfast how sweet it was for her little sister to come into bed and give her a big hug. But when asked, the youngest denied having done so, saying that she'd been in her own room all night. This was put down to dreaming, either the eldest having dreamt of receiving a hug or the youngest sleepwalking. The night after they left, I was woken with the distinct feeling of someone sitting on the end of my bed. I assumed it was the dog, until I moved my hand and realized that he was on the other side of my body. Frightened, I plucked up the courage to peek down the bed to see the distinct impression of a flattened duvet, as if someone was sat on it. Immediately, I switched on all the lights and the sensation or impression was gone. I recruited my mum to stay with me for the rest of the week. When my sister returned home, I told her of what happened, and she just laughed it off. A few days later, she called to say they'd been hearing footsteps upstairs, so she smudged the house with sage and things settled down again. To this day, she thinks perhaps someone went home with her after work. Thank you for putting together the podcast. It's fascinating and well produced. I look forward to hearing more very soon. Thank you so much for these fascinating stories. Deathbed visions and phenomena are fascinating, deeply moving and wondrous. Our recent episode, The Tale of the Banshee, explores Celtic folklore and culture surrounding death and supernatural phenomena at the time of death. And since then, we've had emails with people coming forward detailing what they have witnessed and felt around dying loved ones, all of which have been powerful and moving to read. In light of this, we would love to do an episode exploring this phenomena. So we invite you to email any of your experiences during such times. We would love to hear and explore this further. If you're interested in this topic, please listen to The Tale of the Banshee and our interview with Enigmazine founder Neil Armstrong, who talks about a moment where he thought he was on his deathbed and he reveals what he saw. Now we move on to listener Martin's story, and it's chilling. A story that occurred while on a job at an old college where he appears to have encountered some otherworldly residents. Hey there, love the podcast. I work all over the UK and your podcast keeps me both intrigued and entertained during the long drives on the motorway. I thought it was about time I shared an experience of my own. I'll start off by saying before this experience, I was skeptical of the paranormal. Though entertained whilst watching popular ghost hunting shows, I was always in the mindset of, well, it's entertainment. They're making things happen. That being said, my experience was as follows. I was a field service engineer for a forklift company. As a young man of 23, my job was to visit different sites and fix forklifts that had broken down. With the nature of this job, I would go to a multitude of different sites. I've been everywhere from standard warehouses to military bases and even prisons. On this occasion, it was the middle of summer and I was sent to a local college that was being shut down for demolition to make way for a new housing estate. There was still one part of the building that was being used for finishing out a plastering course, but there was no one there this particular day. Their forklift had broken down earlier in the day and I was closest to respond. This college was old, with Victorian-style masonry, etc. This was going to be the last job of my day. On this site, I was told that myself and the caretaker, Simon, were going to be the only people on site. I spoke with him briefly about where the forklift was and how I could get my van there, so my tools were nearby. He gave me his phone number in case I needed him and directed me to the forklift. Things started off like business as usual. I gave the forklift a once-over, found the fault, and proceeded to repair it. Now, this is the point where my outlook on all things paranormal was changed. The forklift was at the far back of the college, on the ground floor, in a large open area with mock walls used for practice in plastering. The far wall had a big feature of several blocks of frosted glass, where light could come in, but you couldn't clearly see through. As I was getting different tools out of my kit, I distinctly heard a man's voice say,
"No, this way."
I was surprised and very puzzled, but figured Simon may have let another contractor in on site. I thought nothing more of it and carried on with the job, but then I heard what can only be described as almost background noise of a group discussion. right outside the door leading to the hallway. This was weird, as Simon had told me that it was only us on site. It was already unlikely that he would have let someone else in, let alone an entire group of people. I looked up, and as I glanced towards the frosted glass, I saw the dark outline of someone walking past. The silhouette was dark enough to block the sunlight coming through. I let curiosity get the better of me, and I stuck my head out along into the hallway. Nothing. Absolutely no one there. I wasn't scared, but my senses definitely became more alert to the possibility of someone being present in the area. I went back to working on the forklift and finishing up. I'd noticed a sign for the toilets earlier when I poked my head into the hallway, so I thought I'd wash up and use the toilet before I drove home. I walked into the bathroom and saw it was still set up in Victorian style, with back-to-back sinks in the middle of a large room with cubicles and ceramic standing urinals. I went about my business, and no sooner had I turned to wash my hands, I heard the terrifying sound of an unseen child giggling. This made my heart jump up into my throat. There was no mistake as to what I'd just heard. Then, the thing that made me absolutely crap myself happened. 3 sink taps. Turned on. All at once, by themselves, right in front of me. I bolted straight out, across the hallway and into the plastering room. I scooped up my tool bag and threw it into my van as I came out of the shutter door. I rang Simon and told him he needed to meet me at the front of the college to let me out right now. Simon came to meet me and saw that I was visibly shaken. I must have been a particular shade of white, because he immediately asked if I was okay. The moment I started to explain, he cut me off and said, "Made themselves known, did they?" My jaw dropped. This place has been haunted for years. It used to be a boys' boarding school back in the day. Plenty of things happen here day or night. I'm used to it now. I told Simon a heads up would have been nice. I got home that day and had to have a few stiff drinks to try to make sense of what I'd experienced. I came to the conclusion that I was now a fully fledged believer. I dared not tell the office what happened in case it would cause them to see me as unstable and not let me near heavy machinery again. I hope you enjoyed reading this story of me bricking myself. If you like, I have a story of my dad's. This is about a nightclub he used to be a bouncer for, which he was convinced was haunted. Keep up the great work, Martin. Of course, we had to find out more about Martin's dad's story, and it doesn't disappoint. In fact, it's equally as unsettling as Martin's. Here is what he shared. Hi Steve, as I alluded to before, my dad had some strange experiences of his own whilst working as a doorman at a well-known Birmingham nightclub in the late 1980s. I'll leave out the name for my dad's sake. To start, my dad is the epitome of old-school hard knock. He's no nonsense, very much a man's man. Even to this day, he would never admit to believing in ghosts or the paranormal. He'd say just because there's no explanation for it now, doesn't mean there isn't one. That being said, on one occasion during a family conversation on the topic, he talked about his time working the door at this particular nightclub. Not long after he started that job, one of his colleagues told him not to stay too long after closing, as that was when things really started to liven up. He was told that glasses would be pushed off the bar, lights would turn on and off by themselves, that sort of thing. But he was yet to experience anything for himself. One night, after closing, the cleaning staff came in to do their usual rip round, and it was policy to have some door staff to stay with them. The crew was comprised of 3 ladies, and after the ground floor was done, they headed upstairs to the VIP area and the manager's office. They'd been up there for around 10 minutes when my dad heard all 3 women scream and come running downstairs. They said they heard a moan and that things were moving around by themselves. They refused to go back upstairs. My dad, being who he is, put this down to them not wanting to finish and clock off early. The incident did, however, pique my dad's curiosity, so he spoke to the manager and asked him if he knew about the strange goings-on, to which the manager quickly replied, "Oh yes." The building used to be an old picture house. The manager explained that the tale going around was that there was a young lad who had snuck into the old cinema and climbed up into the rigging, but tragically fell and was accidentally hung. He said that this spirit was affectionately known as Henry, and that he was mischievous and playful. He even said that on occasion, when doing admin work in his office, his calculator would start tapping, and all manner of numbers would come up. He would simply say, "Piss off, Henry," and the tapping would stop. The last thing my dad experienced while working there was during their closing up walkthrough, to make sure that there were no strangers strewn around. His friend and partner on the door, a tall, staunch, imposing figure of a man, went upstairs to clear the VIP area. Some time went by, and after a while my dad thought to himself, "What's taking him so long?" My dad made his way up and found his colleague on the floor behind a sofa, knees tucked up to his chest, wide-eyed, with tears streaming down his cheeks. To this day, he's never told my dad what happened to him up there, but it scared him enough that he went to work at a different nightclub after that incident. I hope you enjoyed this story as well. Kind regards, Martin. Some people only ever experience one paranormal event, but find that that one event is so unsettling, it stays with them for the rest of their lives. Here is George's story. Hi there. I was recently listening to Strange Residents episode 50 when I heard a story sent in by listener Jamie that was very similar to one of my own. My experience took place in my childhood home, which was over 100 years old. It was a small 4-bedroom house. When I was around 5 years old, I had a long rectangular-shaped bedroom with a bed, tall cupboard, and a chest of drawers. I never thought the house was haunted until one night I woke up from a very strange dream which I couldn't quite remember. I kept a small lamp at my bedside because I was afraid of the dark, so I flicked it on and reached for my book. As I was reaching for it, I noticed something at the corner of my eye. A figure in a green leather jacket and a tartan hat. The figure was that of a man, and in his hand he held a long wooden cane. I sat bolt upright and stared at him. He stood immobile for approximately 5 seconds before falling over and disappearing. Shocked, I ran to my parents' bedroom to wake them. They came to my room and searched for it thoroughly, but found nothing. We never found out what it was, but hearing Jamie's experience has inspired me to send this in. I've been listening to your podcast for 6 months now, and I am working my way through each episode on my daily commute. Keep up the good work. George. Paranormal events aren't always negative or frightening, as illustrated by this next story, which hails from Yorkshire. Hello, Haunted UK podcast. I love the show and thought you might like to hear my experience with the unexplainable. In 1998, I moved into a 1930s 3-bedroom semi-detached home in West Yorkshire with my mum and brother. It was a modest little home, and I loved it from the moment I walked in as a 9-year-old. Now aged 35, I own the house. It has always felt warm and welcoming despite a few strange events. The first time we experienced something strange was on the day of my 13th birthday. My best friend Louise had brought me a small glass ornament which sat in a proud position on the mantel above the fireplace. My mum and I were sat watching telly later that evening when the ornament flew off the mantel, landed in the middle of the room, and broke into 2 pieces. My mum and I both sat there fixed to the spot for a while, then slowly turned to look at each other as if silently asking whether we'd both saw that. After a few moments, my mum plucked up the courage and spoke to say, "Well, that was weird." From the trajectory and where it landed in the middle of the room, the ornament couldn't have simply fallen off. It was as though it had been swiped off. Fast forward to the following week, and Louise and I were going on a 10-day residential trip with school. She was a year older than me, and it was a kick to the gut when she dumped me to hang out with the girls in her own year instead. I sat sad and on my own for the 18-hour drive from West Yorkshire to Berlin, Germany. All was not ruined though. I soon struck up a friendship with a boy who was also sad and alone, and we're still good friends to this day. But Louise was never forgiven, and we went our separate ways. I'm thinking back to the broken ornament the week before. Perhaps it was a warning about this so-called friend. About 2 years later, I was in the bathroom taking a shower when I heard an odd crackling noise behind me. I turned to briefly see what I thought was electric arcing around the rim of the shower head. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it, so being a silly teenager and not thinking about the danger mixing water and electricity, I decided the best course of action would be to quickly wash out the shampoo and get out. Less than a minute later, I heard a clear and unfamiliar female voice say in a very urgent tone,
Look out! Turn around!
I was alone in the bathroom and the door was locked, so I don't know where this voice came from, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I turned to see the electric shower unit behind me on fire, and the shower curtain was catching fire too. I quickly switched the unit off, jumped out, and shouted,
Mom! Fire!
I'd never heard this female voice before. It was posh, well-spoken, and not like my own thick Yorkshire accent. Surely, if it was my own internal monologue, it would sound like me. What makes this moment even stranger is that, at that very moment, my mum was experiencing something unusual downstairs. She was sitting in the living room when she heard the unmistakable footsteps of my childhood dog, who'd passed away a few weeks prior. They scrambled fast from the kitchen, through the house, and up the stairs. She got to her feet just in time to see a glimpse of the dog's orange and white tail as it disappeared round the corner and out of view. She had a strong feeling that something was wrong and followed quickly in pursuit. She was nearly at the top of the stairs before I called out about the fire. We cannot explain it, but we're very grateful. There have been a few other minor events over my 26 years of living there, but I feel very safe in this home. If it was paranormal activity, then whatever it was doesn't wish me any harm. Quite the opposite, in fact. Thank you. Steph Craven. Next, Jess shares stories of several unusual and inexplicable experiences that she's had. Hi there. I'm only just starting Season 3, but loving this podcast so far. I've always been interested in the paranormal, UFOs, aliens, or conspiracy theory type subjects. Throughout my life, I've regularly had strange things happen to the point where it's become normal for me. For example, I've had belongings go missing, then turn up in plain sight weeks later in places I'd already looked. Perhaps these are things that could be explained if looked deeply enough into them, but they definitely don't feel normal. Sometimes I feel like there's something or someone behind me while I'm driving, and when I'm home alone, I hear noises which could be explained away as the house settling. But I feel as though that since I've got older and gotten into meditation and spiritual type books, I've had more things happen that I can't really explain at all. This incident occurred a few years ago during the pandemic when I was working from home. I was alone at the house and sat in the dining room working on my laptop when I heard the dining room door click and slowly swing open roughly halfway. I thought it was strange, but told myself that perhaps I hadn't closed the door properly, and it's simply taken a while to pop back open. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a white mist go past, and it felt like it stopped behind me. I tried to come up with an explanation, but I was honestly so scared I didn't want to turn around. At that moment, my mum came home and the feeling of someone behind me went away. I still try to tell myself it was just my imagination. The next experience I'm going to tell you about is something I remember very clearly and still can't quite explain. For some background information, at that time I had a photo frame with a picture of me and my ex. We'd not long broken up and I hadn't taken it down yet. So I'd gone to work and come back home on my break to find my heavy glass photo frame on the floor. At first, I thought the screws had fell out, but this seemed unlikely as it had been up there a good 5 years. I picked up the frame and had a look at what could have possibly happened to make it fall. The screw was still in the wall, and I checked to confirm it was not loose. As for the frame, it had a little hole on the back, so it actually slotted into the screw. The strangest thing was that it appeared as though the frame had been thrown into my wardrobe door. There's still a massive dent there now, as I've not fixed it yet. I have no plausible explanation as to how it could have fallen off by itself. It would have had to have been physically lifted off the wall and thrown. Needless to say, I was afraid to sleep in my room that night. Apologies that this is so long, but just as I was writing those stories, I had another incident come to mind. This occurred not long after my uncle's COVID-related death. Side note, perhaps this and my previous experience are linked, as it was around the same time. Anyway, a few nights after we lost him, I had the most vivid dream he was sat downstairs talking to my mum. I'd never had a dream like that before. In my dream, I walked downstairs and saw him as clear as day sitting at the dining room table. When I woke up, I had to go and check that he wasn't there because it felt so real. I told my mum about the dream and she said it was my uncle just letting me know that he was okay. As I said, I've had a lot of small things happen throughout my life. I hope that you found some of it interesting. Also wanted to say I found it so cool that you're based in Halesowen, as I only live 15 minutes away. Usually the podcasts I listen to are American, so it was nice to find one so close to home. Can't wait to hear the next episode. From Jess. This next listener story sent chills down my spine the first time I read it, and involves more than one full-body apparition from someone who has had experiences throughout their life, from early childhood onwards. Hi Steve. First of all, I love the podcast. It's absolutely fantastic, and I've been listening since July 2024. I've now caught up and eagerly await the next episodes. Long may you continue. You've certainly made my hour-long daily commute bearable. For this, I thank you. Now, I should start by saying that I'm in the armed forces, so for this reason, I shall change my name, and locations will be minimized when needed. I should say that I'm not a medium and I'm not psychic, although I do wish I was sensitive enough to experience the paranormal more regularly. But saying that, I have had a few experiences in my life. Some scary, some bewildering. Here are a few to get the ball rolling. When I was a toddler, I lived in a town called Tyldesley in Lancashire. At the time, I lived with my mother and father and 2 older brothers. They have also had experiences, and I will insert them during this timeline. First, before I was born, my family lived on the main street in Tyldesley, the property being a travel agent at the front, and my family lived at the back and upstairs. One day, my father was home alone, my mother being at work and brothers in school, when he decided to have a bath. He was lying comfortably in the hot water when he heard footsteps starting to come up the stairs. Thinking someone was home, "Hello?" he called out, but received no reply. He was naturally a bit annoyed by this, and I should say now that he was very much a skeptic when it came to ghosts and alike. He was about to get up and see who the rude person was who wasn't responding, when a tall man dressed in Victorian clothing, complete with top hat, walked into the bathroom, sat on the toilet, as a seat I hasten to add, as opposed to using it, addressed my dad by name, "John," and then promptly vanished. This, of course, shocked him to the core, as he explained to me many years later. My family moved to a larger property, still in the same town, and as they were moving, my dad found out that the property they were leaving had at one point had a mortuary in the basement. Was this one of the spirits who was once laid there, or maybe a family ancestor? Unfortunately, I will probably never find out. My family moved to the larger house and soon settled in. I was eventually born, and nothing unusual happened until I was around 2. We had wonderful neighbors on either side of our house, and life was good. One morning, there was a knock on our front door. My dad answered to find the old lady next door, holding me in her arms. Apparently, I'd managed to not only get out of my cot, but negotiated the stairs and somehow unlocked the front door, locked by an internal Yale lock, and was found happily riding an ornamental motorcycle in our neighbor's front garden. To this day, I have no memory or clue as to how I achieved all this. Personally, I think something led me out. Good or evil, I don't know. Let me say now that my dad was extremely security conscious and would lock the house up securely each night. Things took a tragic turn in the mid-80s when my mother grew ill and passed away from cancer. Her death blew the family apart. My dad remarried, my brothers quickly left home, and I was left by myself with my dad's new wife. Just before my brothers left home, something very unusual happened. My brother was called downstairs by my stepmother one evening, and as he descended the stairs, he came face to face with a lady in white walking up the stairs. My stepmother was at the bottom of the stairs looking up and couldn't see anything. What she did see was my brother freak out, turn, and vault over the side of the banister back up the stairs. This would have been extremely difficult to do, so the fact that he achieved it means he was extremely scared by something. I have every faith that this spirit was not my mum, for anyone who may be wondering. I should say now that my mum has never appeared to me, as much as I would want her to. Although I have felt a presence, I even have a photo of my baby son sat on the floor playing with his toys and looking up as if in conversation with someone, but I am yet to see her spirit. Now fast forward a couple of years, the neighbors either side of us were still fantastic. Unfortunately, the old man next door, the one with the ornamental motorbike I mentioned earlier, had gone into a hospice and was being cared for until he passed away, leaving just his wife at home. One night, I had a dream. The dream was of me in my back garden playing. It was a warm, sunny day, and for some reason, I turned to look at the back of my house. I immediately saw our elderly neighbors in their back bedroom window, both looking down, smiling and waving to me. I smiled and waved back, then woke up. It was a few hours later that I was told the old lady next door had passed away in the middle of the night, around the same time that I was having my dream. Was this a random dream of summer happiness, or was it my lovely neighbors saying goodbye in the only way they could? Even now, I get choked up thinking about this. Years later, I joined the army, completing my training and starting my new career. In the late 90s, my dad fell ill with cancer, and at this point I was serving a tour in Northern Ireland. I'd spoken to my dad a few weeks earlier, but later calls went unanswered as he was asleep or resting. I remember that our last conversation had ended with the phrase, "I'll see you on the 10th," this being the date of my Christmas leave that year. On the morning of December the 7th, 1999, I was on guard at a base. The night was cold. The moon and the stars were out, and there was still an hour until my relief would show up. At 3 a.m., everything went quiet. Very quiet. The hairs on the back of my neck and arms stood up. My senses were suddenly on full alert, and I even readied my weapon to fire, thinking someone was about to attack. This feeling lasted about a minute before things returned to normal. Later that morning, my officer took me to one side and broke the news that my father had passed away at 3 that morning. I knew then that my dad had come to say goodbye. In 2003, I was sent abroad to Iraq, and during this tour, something happened that to this day I cannot explain. During a routine foot patrol, we took a few moments to pause and have a water break, check navigation, etc. I was stood against a wall facing backwards to give some form of protection. We were all wearing personal radios. These enabled us to talk to each other, and the commander's radio allowed him to speak to headquarters. Now, let me say that my radio only let me speak to the members of my team. I could not transmit to headquarters, nor could I receive transmissions from them. As I was looking around, a woman's voice came through my headset, clear as day. The words,
"Joe, get down!"
I immediately took a knee, and not a second later, a burst of gunfire hit the wall above me exactly where I'd been standing. After the patrol had finished, I asked who the woman on the radio was. All I got was strange looks from my team. We had no females on our patrol, and as I said, my radio couldn't receive transmissions from outside of my patrol. I do believe that this was my mum who came through the radio that day and saved my life. I believe this, as no one in my platoon used first names, and no one ever uses my full first name, even in my family. I hope you enjoy these little experiences. Hopefully I experience more. I do have more stories should you be interested. Until then, as you say, take care and stay safe. Kind regards. Here are some additional stories kindly sent in by this listener. Hi there. I have 2 other incidents that happened to me on air bases in the UK. Both locations are in North Yorkshire. One is a popular museum and the other was, until recently, an operational airbase. For the benefit of security, I won't name either. So to the first incident. In 2015, I visited an air museum located, as I said, in North Yorkshire. I've always been interested in the early days of military aviation from World War I to World War II. Taking the opportunity to visit and spend the day surrounded by vintage aircraft was too good to pass up, so I immersed myself with every aspect of the area. I must have read every poster, placard, display, and watched every video that was played. The museum had the old control tower made up to look as it was when it was operational during the war. It had been my first port of call when I first arrived, and as I got to the end of the day, I popped back in to finish up there. It had gotten slightly darker during the afternoon, and this time the tower was devoid of any visitors bar me. It's important to add here that the museum used mannequins in its displays. I don't usually find these freaky or weird, but these ones seemed a little too real for some reason. As I was looking at the main operations room, which had a big chalkboard stating aircraft status on it, time of takeoff, time on target, etc., something felt, well, off. The room became warmer, and the volume started to increase from quiet muffling to the noises of the control tower. At first, I thought some recording had kicked in for the benefit of the visitors, but I quickly realized that there hadn't been any such recording that morning. For some reason, I felt compelled to shut my eyes, and as I did so, the volume steadied at what I would call normal levels. I could hear phones ringing, female voices answering, orders being given, and the hustle and bustle of an airfield control tower. I could even smell brewing tea and the smell of people, as in soap or cologne. Keeping my eyes shut, I was able to hear aircraft engines outside. At this point, someone spoke to me, and I felt a friendly hand on my arm. The voice asked, "What time do you take off tonight?" The feeling of the hand on my arm made me open my eyes, which immediately returned everything to normal. I found myself standing next to a mannequin that was made up to look as a pilot who was chatting to one of the female control tower mannequins. The hatch or door we were at was labelled Air Ops. Does this explain the question I was asked? I spoke to a friend of mine about what happened, and he has said that the way I was dressed might have unlocked the time slip, along with other factors that I don't begin to pretend to understand. I was dressed in brown walking boots, blue jeans, a white woolen sweater, and a flying jacket of World War II era, as it was a cold day. Did I resemble a pilot enough to unlock a time slip? I really don't know, but I will return again when I get the chance, and yes, I'll dress the same. I should also mention that my father had brought me to this same museum when I was about 11. They have a cockpit of an aircraft that you can sit in and play with the controls. My dad was chatting to one of the workers at the side of the cockpit as I sat inside, twisting knobs and pressing buttons and working the throttle. The worker then asked my dad if I'd had any flying experience, air cadets or such like. My dad said, "No, why?" To which the worker replied, "Well, he's just done a perfect pre-flight check on this aircraft." Maybe I was a pilot in a previous life. I do seem to relate to the 1940s and absolutely love Spitfires. My second encounter was about a year later. I'd married and had been issued a married quarters house on another airbase. I'm not in the RAF, I'm actually Army, but they put us there as there weren't any houses near my camp at the time. It was a lovely place to live, a fantastic pub down the road and very nice neighbours. We could also watch the planes take off, practice and land. But the houses had always been rumoured to be haunted. We were told the stories, but although they were interesting and good to hear, I was prepared to wait until something happened. Turns out, I didn't have to wait long. Flitting shadows would be seen in the house. We'd be sitting in the living room, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see someone going to the stairs. Cold spots would appear and disappear instantly. We also heard conversations in different parts of the house. If we were upstairs, they'd be in the kitchen and vice versa, but we could never hear what was being said. Imagine hearing a conversation, but you're underwater. My main encounter came one day when I was walking from my house to the old medical centre. I admit, I was kind of on autopilot that day, and I was ambling along when I saw the figure of a pilot come towards me. Automatically, I saluted and gave a "Good morning, sir," to which he replied and saluted before passing me. It took me 5 or 6 steps to realise how he was dressed. It was definitely a World War II era flying kit. Brown leather helmet, goggles, flight jacket, and blue trousers with brown boots. I quickly spun around, but he was gone. The area was very open. There was no way he could have vanished into a building or behind a wall. I hurried into the medical centre and told a friend about what had happened. His eyebrows shot up and said, "I saw you salute thin air and wondered what the fuck you were doing." Another medic then recounted that many people had seen that gentleman over the years. He wasn't threatening, simply going about his duty. Well, those are my stories for now. I hope you all enjoy them, and do please carry on with the podcast. I find all the stories absolutely brilliant and eagerly await the next. My very best regards to you and the team, and all the listeners who have also shared their experiences. Take care. And now for the grand finale of the season. A story which is so chilling, so strange, we had to ask someone very special, an expert in their field in fact. It is of course the brilliant writer and parapsychologist Evelyn Hollow, who is going to tell us all about the Monk of Llanover.
My name is Evelyn Hollow, and this is the Llanover Monk, today's final story. I've had a career of service in not only the police, but also in the armed forces. After leaving the forces, I joined the police and was part of both the road policing unit as well as the armed response unit. Over the years, I've seen my fair share of death in many different ways, so I'm used to seeing potentially disturbing scenes. Now, I don't believe in ghosts at all, but I do have to admit that I've always had an interest in the paranormal and supernatural. But instead of reaching for those as explanations for strange and unusual incidents, I tend to go down the route of science, misidentification, and good old rational thinking. I've had a few encounters and experiences which have challenged my logic and belief, but the following incident really did leave me with many unanswered questions, and in some ways it still does. I was witnessing something happening to a very reliable and close colleague, a person who, like me, had seen their fair share of the not-so-nice side of life. In the early hours of one particular evening, I was on the armed response vehicle, and I was crewed with Mike, not his real name, and we'd been dispatched to an incident with the other armed response vehicle to an address near Abergavenny. This was around 2 a.m. on a warm August evening. We met with the other crew and popped off to deal with the incident, which wasn't overly serious, and then went back to Abergavenny station for a cuppa and a mandatory hot debrief. With the incident now sorted out, Mike and I jumped into our car, a Volvo T5, which in those days was our go-to before the BMWs came along. We made our way towards Newport, our main city, and at this point I'd guess that it would have been around 4:30 in the morning. As you leave Abergavenny, you pass through a village called Llanover. This was once a large country estate dating way back to the 18th century with numerous workers' houses. These houses were renovated, adding to what is now a very pretty village with an A-class road running through the middle. As you approach the village from Abergavenny, the road is completely straight for around a mile from the previous village of Llanfoist, rising gently until you reach Llanover with impressive stone cottages and walls lining each side of the road. I was driving, and Mike and I were chatting about the earlier incident. The aircon was on in the car as it was a warm and fairly airless night. We were both wide awake and back in patrol mode. After the firearm incidents we'd just left, and at this time of night, that road and area has very little traffic, and we'd driven from Abergavenny about 7 miles back and had seen maybe one other car. As we were driving up the gentle rise and passing the first couple of houses, I suddenly saw Mike's posture go rigid and he shouted, "Stop, John, stop, stop." Thinking he'd spotted something going on, or perhaps something in one of the driveways, I braked firmly to a stop. Once stationary, I looked across at him to see him looking at me with a horrified look on his face. Not what I was expecting to see. Mike was probably one of the least flappable cops I'd ever worked with, coming from a valley pit town, being a rugby player and very matter-of-fact in everything he did. This look was not one I'd ever seen on his face before, and I didn't like it at all. "What?" I asked him. "What do you mean, what?" he said. "You've just run that bloke over." I admitted I laughed and told him I hadn't run anyone over, and asked him what he was talking about. I could see him craning his neck to look back at the road, wrestling with this conversation. I put the handbrake on and got out of the car. As we'd entered the village, about 500 metres back, there had been the start of street lamps, all of which were on and illuminating the long straight section of road, showing nothing. No man, no animal, no debris. Nothing but straight, clear road. Even though I knew I hadn't hit anything, I walked around to the front of the vehicle to inspect it to see if there was any evidence that had struck anything. Again, completely without any damage or marks that would indicate impacting with someone or something.
There's nothing there, mate.
I got back into the car and saw Mike looking very confused. I told him that I'd obviously not hit anything and asked him what he saw. He told me that as we'd come into the village, he saw a figure standing in the road ahead of us, on our side of the road, but near to the central white lines. He said he obviously thought it was odd, but then saw I hadn't slowed down or even appeared to notice. He said he shouted at me to stop, but I then drove directly into the figure, striking him around the area of the driver's side headlamp. I could see him realising that I hadn't actually just run over anyone, and he was slowly getting back to his usual calm self, albeit feeling a bit foolish. I asked him to describe what he saw. There are some big old trees that line the road, and I thought that maybe the street lamps flickering through the trees had created an optical illusion. I told him this and he shook his head, saying there was no question he could see a human figure, solid and standing in the road. He described the man as wearing a long brown hooded cloak with the hood up, facing away from us like a monk. I then asked how could he have known it was a man then? He just shrugged, saying that he felt it was. To show how quiet the road was, we had been stationary for around 5 minutes and hadn't seen nor heard any other vehicles. There were also no lights on in any of the windows of the houses, and all we could hear was the breeze moving the leaves in the treetops, as well as the occasional bleating of sheep from the nearby fields. I was intrigued by now, so I turned the car around and drove back the way we came, before turning again to approach the village once more. I drove into the 40-mile-an-hour restriction at maybe 15 miles an hour, and as we approached the place where Mike had seen this phantom monk, I slowed to a crawl. I then saw Mike sit bolt upright in his seat. I glanced across at him to see him staring past me out of my side of the window, eyes wide and mouth open, with a look of real fear on his face. "Can you see him again?" I asked. "It's right by your window," he said. I could feel the hairs on my arm go up, and a cold feeling washed over me as I turned to look at whatever Mike could see standing by my window. And there was nothing there. Looking back at Mike to tell him this, he looked like he was in agony, his face scrunched up and moving like he was trying to crawl backwards away from whatever he could see. Instinct took over and I accelerated away. Even as we moved further away, Mike still looked in pain. He kept saying, "Stop, stop," repeatedly. I thought he was talking to me, but I had zero intention of stopping. Yet now I'm not so sure it was me that he was talking to. It was only as we passed out the village and into the darkness of the road that he suddenly seemed to slump down and relax. As soon as he seemed more himself, I pulled into a lay-by and asked him what the hell had just happened. It was more the change in Mike's normally calm and practical behaviour that freaked me out than any talk about a ghost that I couldn't see. Once he'd sufficiently calmed down, he told me that after the thing appeared by my window, he felt an overwhelming sense of sadness, regret, guilt, and anger wash over him. This feeling stayed with him until I cleared the village, then it suddenly seemed to lift. By this time, he was pretty much back to his old self again and seemed genuinely embarrassed over what had happened. We then got a call, so I had no further chance to really talk about it before the end of the shift. As an interesting postscript, I got a call from him at home later that day to say that his wife had given birth to his first child that afternoon, nearly 3 weeks early. If it had been an optical illusion the first time he saw it, then surely when I'd returned to literally the same spot, I'd have seen something too. I was at the same point in the road that he'd been when he saw the figure, yet I saw nothing whatsoever. I couldn't offer any support with regards to encountering the same thing as Mike did. Although I may not believe in ghosts, I do believe in some kind of spark within all of us. Call it a spirit or soul or whatever you wish. But I know that on the many occasions I've been giving CPR or some other significant first aid to a seriously injured person or those with acute catastrophic health conditions, I've personally, sadly, seen that moment when that spark leaves their eyes. It's indefinable, and I have no doubt that any medical professional or police officer would tell you the same thing. I still don't believe in ghosts, but I believe that some very reliable people genuinely believe they see them. And this piece was sent by John Williams. So, general thoughts on this. He's right in that he could have thought initially it was an optical illusion, trick of the light, if it's low light, shapes from the trees, flickering lights, things like that, but there are no lights there in the road, there's no lights on in the window, so where is the light coming from? Could have been the headlight that the car, catching something depends on the level of sort of brush by the side of the road, if there's anything overhanging it, and then you could get a sense of visual pareidolia, and that the light and the shadow take on the form of a person, And that is to say that it's simply a slightly cylindrical object at the top and then sort of a long, slim figure beneath it. And, we automatically see that and think person. But the fact that he returned to the same spot, in the same position, in the same light, and saw nothing, but his partner did see it again. And, and this time, he said it was right up against the window, is incredibly odd. The way that people often describe seeing these figures, and then they say, they're monks and things like that, I think you can relatively disregard, because we often say, why do people always see monks and nuns and things like that? And I don't think that's true. I think that if we see a form of a person, whether it's a ghost or not, if the form is shapeless in the body, i.e. it looks like it's wearing a large coat or dress or cloak or things like that, and the features aren't immediately available or the hair is obscured, then we tend to automatically think, okay, hooded figure. And so the first hooded figures that we conjure are always things like monks and nuns. So whether or not what he was seeing was actually a monk or whether it was a hooded figure, but due to eyewitness identification, or eyewitness misidentification rather, he says it's a monk. Obviously he's a police officer, his level of eyewitness identification should be fairly good, but it would completely depend on the light conditions. However, I do think it's interesting that they were able to see it twice, because if you see it once, you can chalk it up to so many different things. But for there to be another witness there, for them both to be police officers, for them to turn around, and then for Mike to see it again in the exact same place, right up against the window, on the other police officer's side, but he can't see anything, is really bizarre. It is absolutely fairly striking.
And that, dear listeners, is the end of this season's listener stories, but also the end of season 6. But don't worry, we will have more fantastic tales, more shocks, more scares, and more intrigue in season 7. And while you wait, we have lots of talk haunts, short haunts, all ready to serve up, as well as plenty on the menu over at Patreon. Remember, on Patreon, we have our Movie Haunt series where Marie and I discuss horror and supernatural films such as The Thing and The Exorcism of Emily Rose. We dissect and talk about life along the way. We also have Tour Haunts, a spooky trek around the UK, visiting places such as Orkney, and the most frightening of all, Pluckley, as well as many more frightening towns and coasts and bustling cities and islands which make up this fascinating isle. We want to say a huge, huge thank you to the wonderful Evelyn Hollow for doing such an amazing job delivering our last story. We're so incredibly appreciative, and it was wonderful to collaborate with you and hear your expert opinion on what must have been a very frightening experience for our listeners in the quietly eerie village of Llanover. For more of Evelyn's work and insight, please check out her book, Atlas of the Paranormal, A Journey to the World's Most Supernatural Places. It's a comprehensive guide to all things haunted, with some incredible cases detailed. And we've placed the link to the book in the show's notes, as well as where you can keep up to date with Evelyn's work. And the thanks doesn't stop there. Each and every single one of you who have sent in stories, as well as to all of you out there who tune in and listen. Thank you. Thank you all so very, very much. So until the next time, stay safe, take care, and always keep your wits about you, particularly on World War II airfields, where the veil of time seems to be dangerously thin. Tread carefully in the wind-whistling halls of Victorian buildings, modern nightclubs, your place of work, and heck, maybe even within the walls of your very own home, new build or old. Who knows what stories abound under that familiarity? But wherever you go, have your eyes open and your senses alert, because there are many, many more stories to be told. And one of those people writing in and telling them could be you.